Good evening, friends. You are most welcome to ThinkAce channel. Today we are discussing the social anthropology, MAN 001, IGNU. Our subject is economic and political organizations, and our topic is production, consumption, and exchange. Contents are introduction part and main theories in economic anthropology, a brief overview part, and key components of economic system, in which we will discuss production, type of food collection and food production, and distribution of exchange, distribution and exchange, and utilization or consumption. Then we will discuss summary references, suggested reading, and sample question. Learning objective: once you have studied this unit, you should able to understand two main schools in economic anthropology and fundamental differences in their approach to study of economic system in simple societies. Describe the main socio-cultural characteristics of hunters-gatherers, pastoralists, and intensive agriculturists, and define reciprocity, redistribution, market exchange, and utilization. Now we will discuss the introduction part. Broadly, an economic system may be defined as the one by which goods are produced, distributed, exchanged, and utilized or consumed. However, interpreting the same for other cultures is not that simple. However, interpreting the same for other cultures is not that simple. There is always a natural inclination towards interpreting the cultures of others through our ethnocentric assertion, which is guided by our own values, beliefs, and rationality. Therefore, it is important to view economy not in isolation but as a part of a larger whole, that is, an integral component of the culture of the people. Adopting an amic that is insider's perspective. To cite an example, participation of a large number of community members in Zoom shifting or Sweden cultivation in Meghalaya, India, and it is associated rituals and community feasting could be viewed as unsustainable, unnecessary, unproductive, and a sheer waste of time by someone living in metropolitan cities like Mumbai or Delhi, where neighbors hardly interact or get to interact with each other. What is sheer? SHWR, sheer waste. Okay. Now, but the same practice developed over generation and influenced by the particular ecological locale and the adaptive challenges faced by the particular community hold great relevance in the economic life and in their economic life. In this unit, we will learn about some fundamental concept of economic anthropology. Economic anthropology may be regarded as a subfield of cultural anthropology pertaining to the study of human economic systems across different cultures. When we talk about economic systems, we generally deal with four important aspects: production, making goods or money, distribution or the allocation of the goods or money between different people, exchange, which refers to the transfer of goods or money between people or institutions, and utilization or consumption, which involves the using up of goods or money. Main theories in economic anthropology, a brief overview. Before going straight into the concept of production, distribution, exchange, and utilization, it will be beneficial to have a broad overview of the main theories and school of thoughts in economic anthropology in order to have a better understanding of these concepts. Till in 1920s, anthropologists did not pay much attention to the study of what later became economic anthropology, or an anthropological study of the working of economic systems in human society. The term economic anthropology was coined by N.S.B. Grass, 1927, an economic historian who defined it as a synthesis of anthropological and economic studies dealing with the study of the ways in which primitive people obtained a living. Grass made a distinct between Brass made a distinction between economic anthropology and anthropological economics. According to him, the latter, in contrast to the former, deals with the study of the ideas that primitive people held about economic matters. He strongly advocated greater research collaborations between anthropologist and economist, as in his view, anthropologists could provide those in the economic field with facts in return for ideas and the fundamental issues involved in getting a living. 1927. Despite his pioneering work, Grass did not have much impact upon later anthropologists working on economic systems. Malinowski's Argonauts, ARGONAUTS Argonauts, Malinowski's Argonauts of the Western Pacific 1922, that is his book, is regarded as one of the pioneering work in this subfield. The crux of Malinowski's argument was that societies like that of the Trobriand Islanders the classic economist did not fit the classic economist model. In such societies, the motive of the economic activities was not confined to the satisfaction of material wants, but embraced much more, such as gains in terms of enhanced social prestige. Further, the boundaries between economic activities and other aspects like religion were interlinked and overlapped. Malinowski's anti-economics Honigman, 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 1973. Malinowski anti-economist Honigman's 1973 approach continued to profoundly influence anthropologists working in the subfield till about the late 1930s and and then made the reappearance as a basic tenet of the substantivist position of the 1950s. A different perspective to the issue came about with the publication of some seminal works by Goodfellow 1939, Hurkowitz 1940, and Firth 1965. A perspective is basically premised around the belief that anthropologists could stand to gain by studying certain attributes of conventional economics and putting them to application to the economics of simple societies. This evolved into what is known as the formalist stance, which center on the argument that the new classic model of the economics based on the study of utility maximization under conditions of scarcity can be applied to any society with appropriate modifications. The new classic model of economics views material behavior as an organized way of using means to arrive at certain valued goals or ends. The assumptions are the man is a self interested and rational being, and that land, labor, and capital are scarce and productive components in the economy. According to Berling 1962, all human cultures are therefore a collection of choice making individuals whose every action involves conscious or unconscious selections among alternatives means to alternative ends, whereby the ends are culturally defined goals. Goals refer not only to economic value or financial gain but to anything that is valued by the individual, be it leisure, solidarity, or prestige. The 1960s witnessed a big controversy in economic anthropology owing to the conflict between the formalist and the substantivist. In the substantivist revolution, Lee Clare and Skandier, Schneider, Skandier at 1968 of the 1950s. In the substantivist revolution, Lee Clare and Schneider 1968 of the 1950s, we see the reappearance of the new version of Malinowski's anti-economics position with substantivism advocating the non-applicability of the controversial and conventional economic theory to the study of the non-Western, non-industrial economics. The so-called substantivist revolution was heralded by the political economist Karl Polan, Polanyi, 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 in his famous work The Great Transformation 1944. According to Polanyi, Polanyi, there are two meanings of economy: the substantive, which refers to a category of observable behavior, example production, consumption, distribution, and the formal, which refers to logic of the rational choice. In his view, the logic of rational choice occurs only in modern market societies and not pre-market societies. In Polanyi's word, 1944, the outstanding discovery of recent historical and anthropological research is that man's economy, as a rule, is submerged in the social relationships. He does not act so as to safeguard his individual interest in the possession of material goods. He acts so as to safeguard his social standing, his social claims, and his social assets. He values material goods only in so far as they serve this end. Neither the process of production nor that of the distribution is linked to the specific or economic interest attached to the possession of goods, but every single step in that process is geared to a number of social interests which eventually ensure that the required step be taken. These interests will be very different in a small hunting or fishing community from those in a vast despotic society, but in either case, the economic system will be run on non economic motives. The work of Polanyi successor like Sahalins, Sahlins, Sahalins 1965 and Dalton 1968 reinforce the substantive position that the economy is merely the process of provisioning society or the socio-cultural system, and that no social relation, institution, or set of institutions is economic, but that it can only serve economic purpose. Thus, it would not be wrong to state that till the early 1970s, the growth and evolution of the economic anthropology has basically revolved around these two schools of thoughts, formalism and substantivism. On the one hand, there have been the formalists who seek to study social relations as concomitant to the process of resource utilization. On the other hand, the substantivists have consistently argued that rational choice is only instituted in the socio-cultural and political systems of capitalist societies, and that in other societies economic behavior is guided by non-economic principles. The 1970 witnessed the influence of Marxian thought on economic anthropology. Scholars like Wolff 1982 highlighted the fact that European capitalist expansion had brought about remarkable transformation among traditional economies which could no longer be studied in isolation but in relation to the capitalist world system. This perhaps hold even greater relevance in the present time of the globalization and a world order where market forces reign supreme. There has also been the growth of other theories in economic anthropology such as culturalism, propounded by Goodman 1986. He argued that the central processes of making a livelihood are culturally constructed. Therefore, models of livelihoods and related economic concepts such as exchange, money, or profit must be analyzed through the local's way of understanding them. With this brief introduction to the basic theories of the economic anthropology, we will now discuss in detail the concept of production, distribution, exchange, utilization, and consumption with examples from across the world. Key components of an economic system. Production refers to the process by which human beings transform through their work matter or natural resources into some goods which is consumable or capable of being used to satisfy their need or want. Distribution is the process of allocation of goods between different individuals or groups, while exchange helps in individual or group acquire particular products into which he or she wishes to convert the quantity allocated to him through distribution. Consumption, as the word indicates, refers to the use of goods or services as far as the interrelationship between these components of the economic system goes. Marx 1904 provides a very apt description, which is as follows: production yields good adapted to our needs. Distribution distributes them according to social laws. Exchange distributes further what has already been distributed according to individual wants. Finally, in consumption, the product drops out of the social movement, becoming the direct object of the individual want, which is served and satisfied in use. Production thus appears as the starting point, consumption as the final end, and the distribution and exchange as the middle. The latter has a double aspect, distribution being defined as a process carried on by society, while exchange as one proceeding from the individual. Production. Economic anthropologists, particularly the substantivist scholars, have generally displayed a tendency towards overemphasizing on the study of exchange processes and relations, with the result that study of the production modes has not been accorded much priority. To cite Honigman 1973, they do not analyze or theorize about the forces and relations of production or about the creation of commodities, but invariably restrict themselves to the circulation and destination of commodities already produced. He further opines that Polanyi tripartite scheme of reciprocity, redistribution, and market exchange presupposes production modes but does not link up with them. The social concomitants, the social concomitants of transactional modes, not of production modes, are of dominant concern to him and his followers. In economic anthropology, production has been given its due importance by Marxian anthropologists, with Marx emphasizing on the centrality of production to the economy. According to Dalton 1961, Marx perceives the economy as a process of interaction between men and their environment, a process through which men as producers integrate the use of natural resources and techniques and assure continuous cooperation in the provision of material goods. Also, according to Marx, the economic base or mode of production is mode of production in every society is made up of two components. First is the force of production, the physical and the technological arrangement of the economic activity. Second is the social relations of the production, the interpersonal and intergroup relationships that man must establish with one another as a consequence of their roles in the production processes. The state, in simple terms, production involves human nature interaction with human being interacting with nature through the means of their culture to rest their material means of existence. It is perhaps for this reason that Goldelayer 1967 argues that production embraces all kinds of production operations regardless of the specific societal context in which they are performed, and that economies ranging from the very simple hunting, gathering, or fishing to more advanced agricultural and industrial economies can be studied within the same analytical framework. We would now be looking into the various modes of production ranging from the simple hunting, gathering, and fishing where human beings occupy and rest from rest from nature their substance nature rest from nature their sustenance without transforming it to the more complex such as animal husbandry and followed by the civilization and cultivation and followed by the cultivation which involves the transformation of the nature. In the evolutionary scheme of society, cultivation and animal husbandry invariably appear after hunting, gathering, and fishing. Lowy, 1938, production for the purpose of simple societies may be basically studied under the two heads food collection and food production. Food collection encompassing the production strategies of hunting, fishing, and gathering refers to all forms of subsistence technologies in which food is secured from naturally occurring resources such as wild plants and animals without significant domestication of either. Food collection is the oldest survival strategy known to man, but in the present day there are very few communities left in the world who are entirely dependent on hunting and gathering for livelihood, such as the Australian Aboriginals, the Inuits living the Arctic region of Canada, and Andamanese tribes like the Ong and Jarwa, etc. However, a number of communities continue to practicing hunting, gathering, and fishing to supplement their nutrition from agriculture. For instance, in the state of Assam, many of the tribes such as Karbis, Tivas, Tiws, Tivas, and Mishings, 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 and Rabhas, 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 etc., are expert in the art of the fishing and hunting, which they practice in conjunction with agriculture. While the study of extensively hunter gatherer communities may help us arrive at some understanding of the man's life in the past, Amber and Amber 1994 cautions against the excessive use of contemporary observations to draw inter- inference about the past for a number of reasons. In their view, we must understand that the early hunter gatherers lived in almost all types of environments, including some very bountiful ones, and not like the contemporary ones who live mostly in marginal areas and therefore are not comparable. Moreover, the contemporary hunter gatherers are not relics of the past and, like us, have evolved continuously. Nor in the past did hunter gathering communities have the opportunity to interact with agriculturists, pastoralists, pastoralist, and industrial or capitalist society. Contemporary hunter gatherers live in a variety of geographical locations and climates, but mostly in marginalized areas where agriculture is not feasible. Nevertheless, such groups seem to share a number of cultural attributes, like the fact that most live in small groups in sparsely populated areas and adhere to a nomadic lifestyle. For them, the camp is the main center of daily activity and the place where food sharing actually occurs. According to Honigman, 1973, the hunter gatherer society is egalitarian, does not recognize individual land rights, and do not accumulate surplus foodstuffs, often an important source of status in the agricultural societies. Such communities usually do not have a class systems or specialized or full-time political officials. Division of the labor is largely on the basis of age and sex. Ethnographic and archaeological evidence indicate that, with few exceptions, such societies generally have a sexual division of labor where men hunt and usually do the fishing while women gather wild plant foods. Sahalin's 1968 calls them the original affluent society, despite the fact that hunter gatherers consume less energy per capita per year than any other group of human beings. According to Sahalin's, ethnographic data indicates that hunter gatherers worked far fewer hours and enjoyed more leisure than typical members of the industrial society. and they still ate well. Their affluence came from the idea that they are satisfied with very little in the material sense. Food production. The origins of the food production began about 10,000 years ago in the Neolithic period, when man took the first step from merely utilizing the transform from merely utilizing to transforming nature through the cultivation and domestication of the plants and animals. Archaeological data indicates that various forms of domestication of plants and animals arose independently in the six separate locales worldwide during the period from 8000 to 5000 BC, with the earliest known evidence found throughout the tropical and subtropical areas of southwestern and south and southern Asia, northern and central Africa and Central America. Gupta 2010. According to anthropologists, on its own, the physical environment has more of a limiting rather than a determining impact on the kinds of subsistence choices made. For instance, according to Binford 1990, further away from the equator, food collectors depends much less on plants for the food and much more on the animals and fish. Food production system may be generally divided into three main kinds: horticulture, pastoralism, and intensive agriculture. Now we will discuss the horticulture. First, horticulture. The term horticulture denotes a simple food production strategy involving the growing of crops using simple hand tools such as the digging stick or hoe, hoe, in the absence of permanently cultivated fields. Horticulture generally does not involve any efforts at fertilization, irrigation, or other means to restore the fertility of the soil once the growing season is over. As far as culture attributes of horticulturist societies are concerned, as far as the cultural attributes of horticulturist societies are concerned, land is generally owned by the community or kin groups. Horticulture practices are generally of two kinds. The most common one is extensive or shifting cultivation, also known as Sweden or slash and burn, jhum in the Indian context. This method of horticulture involves the cultivation of a particular plot of the land for a short time, followed by a long fallow period when the land is left alone to regain its fertility. The process of preparation of a piece of land for shifting cultivation involves clearing the undergrowth and felling of trees, which are then left to dry. Just before the seasonal rains are to begin, they are set fire. The ash is also supposed to rejuvenate the soil, and immediately after the first shower of the season, a mix of crop seeds such as maize, gourd, etc., are sown with the help of the digging stick. Generally, all adults are involved in food production with a division of labor based on sex. This particular form of cultivation has been derived by many as a main reason for deforestation and decimation of forest and a number of environmental problems stemming from it. In India, shifting cultivation continues to be widely practiced in many states of the northeast like Assam, Meghalaya, etc., and there have been many policy initiatives to wean away communities from these practices. The other form of horticulture pertains to the planting of long growing tree crops such as coconut and banana, which after a few years continues to yield crops for a number of years. Most horticulture societies, according to Amber and Aber 1994, do not rely on crops alone for food, but rely on the combination of subsistence strategies, which includes hunting, fishing, and the raising of domestic animals like pigs, chickens, and goats, etc. Second is pastoralism. Pastoralism is characterized by a heavy, though rarely exclusive, reliance on the herding of domesticated animals for a living. It is usually practiced in the areas not particularly amenable to agriculture, such as grasslands and other semi-arid habitats. A classic attribute of pastoral society is mobility of all or part of the society as a normal and natural part of life. This mobility might be permanent nomadism, we can say it nomadism, or a seasonal, which is referred to as transhumance. The reason behind the mobile nature of their lives lies in that fact that their territory, by necessity, has to be spread over a large area. Once their herds have grazed in an area to the maximum, it has to be left alone for the grass to renew, and they have to move on in search of newer pasture. Pastoral communities are generally small in size. In India, for instance, the Bakarwals are the pastoral nomadic community inhabiting the high altitude meadows of the Himalayas and Pir Panjal ranges. Every year, they take their sheep high into the mountains above the tree line to the meadows, which are reachable only after a long, arduous journey. Among pastoral nomads, grazing lands are generally held communally, and a chief may be the designated owner of the land. According to Sneath 2000, pastoralist systems are commonly organized into patrilineal clans and lineages that function as corporate livestock owning units, with men being typically the owners of livestock wealth. There is sexual division of labor, with men being in charge of the herding while women processes the herd's products such as milk. Such communities, according to Amber and Amber 1994, often make agreements with settled agriculturists about rights to graze unused fields or even to clear harvested fields of leftover. While pastoralism has been an effective and sustainable economic strategy in resource poor environments, it could lead to overexploitation of the environment when outside forces constrict the available space. Third is intensive agriculture. Intensive agriculture enables human beings to cultivate fields permanently by adopting a variety of techniques. It involves the use of fertilizers, both organic such as cow dung and inorganic chemical fertilizers. The use of technologies ranging from a humble plug to the tractor and could also incorporate complex systems of irrigations and water control. Society practicing Societies practicing intensive agriculture generally have individual ownership of land. Such societies are also likely to be characterized by the higher degree of economic specialization, more complex political organization, and disparities in the distribution of wealth and power among different sections of the society. The basic unit of production is the family, and division of the labor takes place according to gender and age. Women in such society have a number of duties associated with the food processing stage, but they also spend a lot of time in the fields. In fact, apart from plugging, which is a taboo in many communities of rural and tribal India, women have an important role in intensive agriculture, particularly wet paddy cultivation, including planting of seedlings, including planting of seedlings in nurseries, transplanting them to flooded fields, weeding and harvesting, etc. While most intensive agriculture is particularly in countries like India live at subsistence level, with the produce barley enough to cater to their own needs. Others have increasingly grown crops such as surplus of the market. While most intensive agriculture is particularly in the country like India, live at subsistence level with the produce barley enough to cater to their own needs. Others have increasingly grown crops as surplus for the market. In fact, following the Green Revolution of the 1960s, farmers in the state of Punjab in India grew increasingly more to the market to cater to the market. Contemporary Indian agriculture is also characterized by the increased trend of the farmers motivated by the market to grow more cash than food crops. Such a trend, coupled with the fact that intensive agriculturists may rely more often on single crops subject to the vagaries of the weather, could result in food shortage. Distribution and exchange. Distribution and exchange has consistently remained the central focus of anthropologists interested in the study of economic systems and their working in society. While being closely related concepts, the main point of distinction between the two is that while distribution determines the proportion of total output that the individual will receive, exchange determines the specific products into which the individual wants to convert the share allocated to him by distribution. Honigman, 1973. He further opines that distribution implies a reward system in which produce is channeled out produce is channeled out among individuals or groups by reason of their control over the factors of production or for the labor they expended in the productive process. Exchange, on the other hand, refers to various processes by which goods and services move or are being transferred between individuals or groups, as for example, between producer and consumer, buyer and seller, donor and recipient. Ford's 1965 work among the Tikopia, Tikopia, Tikopia is a seminal study on distribution. In his view, every society has explicit or implicit norms on how the total pool of products is to be shared among its members, and that these norms are geared to address the issue of division of a joint product and the compensation of the factors of production, especially labor. His observations of the principles of distribution in the Tikopia economy, which hold equal relevance of many pre-industrial economies, led him to certain conclusions. According to him, 1965, there is a definite concept that all participants in a productive activity should receive a share of the product, but that social consideration do not make it necessary for this share to be exactly proportionate to the contribution in time, labor, or skill that each individual had made. Such inequalities in terms of allocation are particularly evident in tribal and peasant societies where social or political achievements entitle some individual to more than an equal share of material reward. Sahalin's 1968 study indicates that despite these inequalities in distribution, the relationship between a chief and the followers in most tribal societies is not exploitative in nature but based on the principle of generalized reciprocity. Based on the principle of generalized reciprocity. Now we shall discuss the action or act of reciprocal giving and receiving, Gregory 1998, or exchange. we shall discuss the act of reciprocal giving and receiving or exchange. According to Cummins 1954, the concept of exchange from the anthropological viewpoint embraces two distinct kinds of transfer events: physical transfer and jural transactions. While the former involves localization and locational movements and physical control, the second involves the transfer of culturally defined ownership and use rights. It is the latter aspects which has aroused the interest of the anthropologist from the very beginning. Significant understanding on exchange and the motives for it came from Malinowski's 1922 work on trade and gift giving among the Trobriand Islanders and Moses's classical essay, The Gift, published in 1922. Malinowski studied the ceremonial exchange system. The Kula ring spread over 18 island communities of the Masim archipelago, including the Trobriand Islanders, and involved thousands of individuals. Members of the Kula ring traveled a long distance by canoe to exchange Kula items: red shell disc necklaces, vegan and solava, traded to the north in the clockwise direction, and white shell armbands, mawali, traded in the southern or counterclockwise direction. If the opening if the opening gift was the arm shell, then the closing gift must be the necklace or vice versa. Malinowski 1922 came to the conclusion that exchange among Trobrianders was better seen as a social act than conclusion Trobriandus was better seen as a social act than a transmission of a usable objects. Exchange, in his view, did not result in economic gain. Quite the contrary, it represented a superiority of the giver over the receiver and placed a burden upon the receiver. Similarly, the basic argument of Moses' essay is that gifts are never free and that they always give rise to reciprocal exchange. According to Gregory 1998, an important notion in Moses' conceptualization of gift exchange is inalienability, or the fact that the object is never completely alienated from giver. Hence, the act of giving creates a social bond with an obligation to reciprocate on part of the recipient. To not reciprocate means not only loss of honor and status, but may also have a spiritual connotation in some societies. Later on, Polanyi, Pollnye, Polanyi, and a group of scholars 1957 tried to distinguish between two kinds of processes involved in exchange among simple communities: goods handling and goods receiving, and raised a number of pertinent questions: who passed on goods to whom, in what order, how often, and with what response among those listed under whom. This is a question. Later on, Polanyi and groups of scholars 1957 tried to distinguish between two kinds of the process involved in exchange among simple communities: goods handling and goods receiving, and raised the number of pertinent questions: who passed on the goods to whom, in what order, how often, and what and with what response among those listed under whom. Based on these answers arriving at after analyzing a number of ethnographic cases, they identified three kinds of exchange. First is reciprocative sequence among fixed partners. Reciprocative sequence among fixed partners. Second is redistributive sequence between a central actor and many peripheral actors. Redistribution sequence between a central actor and many peripheral actors. Third is random market sequence 1957. In a later work, Sahalin's 1965 reduced these three kinds of exchange into two broad types. First is reciprocity or vice versa, movements between two parties, and second is pooling or redistribution involving collection from members of a group and redivision within this group. We will now try to understand the concept of reciprocity and redistribution with a few ethnographic examples. We will also spend some time understanding market exchange, as in today's monetized economy, almost all societies of the world are coming within its ambit. Reciprocity. What is reciprocity? Reciprocity constitutes the main basis of exchange in most non-market economies. According to Sahalin's 1965, reciprocity may be defined into three types based on the criterion of the stipulation of material returns, which are as follows. First is generalized reciprocity involving unstipulated reciprocation is gift giving without consideration of any immediate or planned return. In such a case, the value of the gift is not calculated and the time of repayment not specified. Such type of reciprocity generally occurs only among close kin or people sharing close emotional bonds, such as between parents and children, between siblings, close friends, etc. B. Balanced or symmetrical reciprocity occurs when someone gives to someone else expecting a fair and tangible return at a specified amount, time, and place. Bonvillian, 2010. Here the exchange occurs owing to the desire or need for certain objects. Giving, receiving, and sharing constitute a form of social security, and according to Honigman 1973, it promotes an egalitarian distribution of wealth over the long run. While generally practiced among equal who are not closely related, balanced reciprocity principles may also be evident in gift giving among kin, kin. To cite a particular example, among relatives in many parts of India, it is common practice for kin to give valuable items and even monetary contribution when a relative's daughter is being married off. The implicit is expectation being that when their own daughter is married off, similar contribution could be expected from the receivers. Sometimes there is a fine line between generalized and balanced reciprocity, particularly gift giving in urban societies, where though it might appear to be generalized reciprocity, there may be strong expectations of balance. For instance, two families residing in the same neighborhood in Delhi may try to exchange gifts of fairly equal value, say based on calculations of what last year's Diwali gift cost. While balanced reciprocity generally operates on egalitarian principles, it could also take on a competitive form. Normally, it might be a means for villagers to bank surplus food by storing up social credit with fellow villagers by giving feast with the expectation that the credit will be returned. But affluent villages but affluent villagers might use this mechanism to enhance their social status by throwing lavish feasts and giving costly gifts. This seems to be the primary objectives of chiefs among many Native American groups of the Northwest Coast in holding the potlatch ceremonial festival, where he would give away gifts, food, and even destroy items of value in a spirit of competition with rival chiefs. C is negative reciprocity. Negative reciprocity is the exchange of goods and services where each party intends to profit from the exchange, often at the expense of the other's. Bolivian, Bonvillian 2010. Practiced against strangers and enemies, it could range from barter, deceitful bargaining to theft, and find social sanctions among many societies. For instance, among the Navajo, Navajo, to deceive when trading with foreign tribes is considered morally acceptable. Cluckhorn, Kluckhorn, Cluckhorn 1972. Barter is believed to fall within the realm of negative reciprocity as it is a means by which scarce items from one group are exchanged for desirable goods from another group. According to Honigman 1973, relative value is calculated and despite an outward show of indifference, sharp trading is more the rule. While talking about the kinds of reciprocity, Sahalin's 1965 points out that reciprocity leans toward generalized extreme on the basis of close kinship and that it moves towards the negative extreme in proportion to a diminution in kinship propinquity and that it varies with other factors such as social rank, relative wealth, and need and type of goods. Redistribution. Second is redistribution. Redistribution refers to a kind of economic exchange characterized by the accumulation of goods or labor with the objective of the subsequent distribution within a social group according to culturally specific principles, while redistribution exists in all societies within the family where labor or products or income are pooled for the common good. It emerges as an important mechanism in societies with political hierarchies. In the latter, it requires a centralized political mechanism to coordinate the collection and distribution of goods, while it serves as a mechanism for dispensing goods within a society. It could also be a means for a chief to consolidate his political power and gain in prestige. It seems to be an objective of the potlatch where chiefs compete with each other to give away and destroy goods of value. In less centralized societies that do not have formal chiefs, the economic entrepreneur or the big man may carry out such acts. In modern market economies, redistribution takes place through taxation by the state, whereby resources are allocated back to the individuals or groups within society, either through the provision of public services or directly through welfare benefits. Third is market exchange. In very broad terms, a market exchange involves the buying and selling of goods, labor, land, rentals, credit, etc. by person using an intermediary tokens of common exchange value. According to Honigman 1973, such a two-party market transaction could very well become a form of negative reciprocity unless some sort of arrangement has been made to ensure at least an approach to balance. Although market exchange need not necessarily involve money, most commercial transactions, particularly nowadays, do involve money. Amber and Amber 1994. Again, while most of the such transaction takes place in a specifically designated marketplace. A market may exist without a designated physical place. This is more so in the contemporary world where significant market transactions take place on the internet. On the other hand, in simple societies, a marketplace may signify much more than a place where economic transactions are performed. In rural and tribal India, even today, weekly hearts or markets provide an opportunity for people to renew friendship, exchange local gossip, arrange marriages, while some may also have deep culture significance. Reliance on the market and the use of general purpose money is increasing universally, with traditional subsistence giving way to commercialization due to factors like demand, increased interaction with other societies, etc. According to Platoner, According to Platoner 1985, the substantivist stance in economic anthropology is rendered redundant in the context of market in the present day. In his words, the pretense that theories of markets and marketing were irrelevant became less viable in a world that increasingly resembles a market system. At the same time, according to Delay 1992, DILLEY, Delay 1992, over simplistic notion of economic man as individual maximizer of economic value as enunciated by the formalist position have now receded in the face of theoretical criticism that such assumptions provide few convincing that such assumptions provide few convincing explanation of socio-economic status. Utilization or consumption. The third component of the economic system following from production, distribution and exchange is utilization or consumption. If we go by the if we go by what Herkovitz 1952 says, then utilization has to be considered to be broader in scope than consumption. According to him, the process of utilization involves two aspects: those leading to further production by employing the resources obtained as capital, and those involving direct immediate consumption to satisfy current wants. While scholars like Dalton 1969 and Salins 1969 have been critical of extending the capital concept to pre-industrial societies, scholars like Firth 1965 have argued that many simple societies do use capital in the economic process either as a productive asset or as a means of facilitating control over purchasing power or as a fund for investment. However, the comparatively high liquidity or ease of convertibility of many goods in primitive and peasant economies from one use to another creates problems in this. Fourth, 1965, for instance, observed that Pandanus, Pandanus, Pandanus mats, mats, on which the Ticopians slept, and bark cloth, bark cloth, used for blankets and clothing, were also utilized in the manufacturing of objects like canoes, canoes, trough, troughs, and sinnet cord, sinnet cord, thereby serving both production and consumption purposes. Coming to the issue of consumption in simple societies, a key concept is that of the consumption unit, which is a kin-based income pooling or household unit that typically incorporates males and females of varying ages and is found in all pre-industrial societies. Lee 1969. According to Firth 1965 and Epstein and Epstein 1967, variation occurs in consumption within the unit on the basis of status and occupational differences. For instance, in many poor rural households of India, men's consumption needs may get priority over that of women. On the other hand, an expectant mother might be given better nutrition than the other women, etc. The patterned way in which a consumer in a simple or peasant economy makes his consumption decisions over time ultimately represents his standard of living. Summary. From the above unit, we have thus learned that the economic systems in simple societies cannot be studied in isolation but must be understood as a part of the larger culture. Production, distribution, exchange, utilization, and consumption are not dependent only on pure economic gain but on the host of social factors. The formalist school in economic anthropology, led by scholars like Raymond Firth, believes that anthropological studies of economic systems could benefit from the application of the neoclassical model of economics based on the study of utility maximization under conditions of scarcity with appropriate modifications. However, substantivists led by Karl Polanyi firmly maintain that conventional economic theory cannot be applied to study of non-Western and non-industrial economies. While this remains one of the enduring debates on the study of economic systems, it needs to be borne in mind that the modern world is a global village and simple societies are increasingly experiencing the impact of globalization and the market economy. Modern day anthropologists going to study such societies are bound to encounter situations where many of their notions gleaned gleaned from books and theories might be challenged, but it is for them to to the occasion, document, and maybe propound new theories on the changes occurring in the simple economies under the impact of modernization and the market. Thank you very much.